Loving God, we give thanks for all of the stories we have heard thus far, and we give thanks for the inspiration that they have been. We pray for Laura this morning, that you will fill her with your Spirit, and that her words will inspire us today. Amen.
Well, good morning, everybody. As you might know, I'm Laura Bruce, and believe it or not, I'm not from Idaho. I think most of you, have heard that I am from Georgia, born and bred. I was born in Macon, Georgia, which is right in the middle of the state. But most of my life I spent in Atlanta, which of course is this big, huge, sprawling place now. When I was a little girl, Atlanta was just an overgrown town, but now it has about 4 million people around it, and it's just too big for anything. Grew up in a very typical Southern home. My father's family were Baptist. I had 4 maiden aunts who all were Baptist and went to church faithfully. My mother's family was Methodist. My parents didn't go to church very much, but they didn't have any objections to sending me, particularly to Vacation Bible School, because by the time I was 6, my mom had gone back to work, and so she needed something for me to do in the summertime. So Vacation Bible School was a really great babysitter back then. I loved the crafts that we did up until, I don't know, one of the latest moves that my mom made in her later years. She had this little dish that had my little 5-year-old handprint in it, and that I had made at Vacation Bible School. I was baptized and confirmed on Palm Sunday before Easter when I was 10 years old. So I had attended church. It was a Methodist church that was within walking distance of my house. So even when my parents didn't take me, I managed to go to that church. Always been a Methodist. Have always gone to Methodist churches. When I was in the 8th grade, we moved one more time, and I moved to a house that was on one corner, and the church was 2 doors down on the other corner. So, and luckily for me, it was a Methodist church, and so I began going to that church. My mother accused me of every time the doors were open, I was in the church. Well, there was a reason for that. I'm an only child, grew up in an adult family. I was the very youngest of all my cousins. I was like 12 or 13 years younger than my closest cousin. So basically, I grew up in an adult household, didn't have any playmates, and also church was an opportunity for me to have someone to visit with and play with that was my age, and so that's why I went to church. Very typical Southern Methodist church. We had Sunday morning services. We had Sunday night services, where as a teen we had Sunday night supper. Then we went to NYF, had a big song fest, and then we went to church at 7:30, I think, somewhere along in there. We had prayer meeting on Wednesday night, which I attended faithfully, because that was an opportunity to sit next to my boyfriend, and I could hold his hand right down beside my knee there so nobody could see me. It was really funny. I look back on it now. But we'd stick our hands right beside our knees, and so that's how we could hold hands, which was really nice. When I was in the 10th grade, I started singing in the chorus at school, and so then I joined the choir at my church, and I have been a choir member since then. Whatever church I've gone to, I've managed to weasel my way into the choir. Sometimes they look at me like, really? You don't sing all that well. But I'm enthusiastic, if nothing else. One of the things that made me know that church was the right place for me was that at this church, Mary Branham, where I was going, they had scaffolding up on the outside of the church. and they were doing something. I don't remember whether they were painting the church or whatever, but the pastor was walking past the scaffolding, and a tool fell and hit him on the head. Well, it didn't knock him out, luckily, but the man never said a bad word. He just got up, rubbed his head, and said, "Well, thank goodness that didn't hurt too badly," and went on his way. Well, I was dumbfounded because my father was a very profane person. All my uncles were very profane people, and most of the people that I was surrounded with as adults were pretty profane in their language, and so I was just astounded that this man would have been hurt and not say anything bad. So I thought, well, there must really be something to this Christian thing. One of the other things that happened when I was in high school was that in the community where I lived, the Methodist church was here. About 4 blocks over was the Baptist church, and about 4 blocks over from that was the Presbyterian church. So we had 3 Sunday night church services to go to. So depending on who was having the better, either BTU or MYF or Presbyterian teenager thing, that's where we went to church on Sunday night. My best friend was Baptist. She went to the Baptist church, and I went to the Methodist church. So we kind of went back and forth to those. I was a part of the MYF service. I was even president of the MYF at one time. And also, believe it or not, at my high school, we had an early morning prayer service before school started. That's how Southern we were. We prayed when we went to school. There was a group called Youth for Christ, I believe was the name of it, that was active in the church, in the school. And like I said, 5 minutes before school started, we would have morning devotionals. That's the one place where I learned how to speak in public, because there would be maybe this many kids in the auditorium, and we would stand up and have a devotional. That's where I got introduced to the upper room, because they're wonderful little messages, and you can use those to speak to people about Christ and what's going on in your life. Next thing that I did was I went to a Methodist college. Georgia, of course, was the big school in Georgia, and even back in 1960, when I went away to go to college, it had better than 20,000 students in it. Well, I knew good and well I couldn't attend a school that had 20,000 people in it. My Lord, I'd have been swallowed up and died. So I went to LaGrange College, which is a United Methodist supported college. It had, at the time I was there, about 500 students. We had very strict curfews as women on campus. I think my freshman year I had to be in at 10:30. And it graduated up to when I was a senior. On Friday night, we could stay out until 12:30. Big whoop, because the town had like 20,000 people in it. You rolled up the sidewalks when it got dark. But anyway, we could stay out. But then on Saturday night, we had to be back at midnight because we had to get up and go to church the next day. So I attended church the whole time I was in college. On Wednesdays at church, we had assembly, which we were required to go to. And it was either a Methodist minister who was giving a sermon for that day, or it was a guest speaker. One time we had this gentleman who was an existentialist who tried to teach us what Camus was trying to say, which just went, Everybody who went out and going, huh? Scratching your head. So I didn't get much out of that. But we were surrounded by other Methodists, and of course there were some other Protestant religions there, but mostly Methodist and all. So I was still steeped in the Methodist church environment. One of the things that happened to me when I was in high school was that my math teacher was Miss Ruth Rogers. She was the first woman diaconal minister in the state of Georgia. There had been no other diaconal ministers called at that time. And she supported herself, of course, by being a math teacher in high school but also she was a minister who went around and spoke at congregations and revivals and things like that. She was a very wonderful woman. I loved her. She gave me a B+ in algebra, and I just about died because that was the first B I'd ever made. Let's see what else. Okay, so after college, I went to work teaching school, got married 2 weeks after I got out of college. And as most, I won't say most, but in my case, I fell away from the church. I married a man who was not religious, who didn't go to church, didn't believe in it, smoked and drank and cussed like a sailor. So we didn't go to church very much. I'd go every once in a while, maybe Easter, maybe Christmas. If I got really hungry to hear Christmas songs, I would go to church. But the second that my daughter Eleanor was born, I was back in church again. I can remember she was, I believe, 3 months old, and I found a Methodist church that was just a couple of miles from where I lived, and we started going to church. I knew how important it was for my child to be reared in the church atmosphere. Now, admittedly, by the time she was 16, I couldn't force her to come to church anymore because she was bigger than I was, and I couldn't hold her down long enough to get her into church. But even today, even though she's not an active church member, she understands how beneficial church is for herself and for Abigail, my granddaughter. When we, after a few years of marriage, we moved back to LaGrange, Georgia, which is where the college was that I went to school in and where my husband was from. And so we moved back to LaGrange, and I started going to a church called Trinity United Methodist. By this time, we had merged with the United Brethren Church. I remember in 1968 when that was such a huge deal that from being a Methodist church, we were now a United Methodist Church. Being Southerners, we'd never heard of the United Brethren Church, didn't know anything about it, but we were merged together. So I started going to Trinity. And that's where I became aware of the structure of Methodist churches and how our Methodist churches are run. All Methodist churches are run in much the same way. They are different in the amount of people who go to the church. They are different in the makeup of the people who go to the church. But underneath that is that basic Methodist way. We're Methodist for a reason. We have a method in the way that we do things at our church. And that's been one of the most stabilizing influences in my life, is that it doesn't matter where I go. If I walk into a Methodist church, I know it. There's several ways that I know it's a Methodist church. It's always, always welcoming. People greet you. I have never, ever been to a Methodist church that people did not come up to me and say, "Hello, I'm so-and-so. Who are you? We're glad you're here today." Only one time have I ever been to a church where the Methodist name was associated with it, and that was a United Church that was part Presbyterian and part Methodist in Juneau. And I did go to the service there, and nobody said hello to me. I was appalled. I thought, oh my God in heaven, where are the Methodists? Another thing that about church, the Methodist church, is whenever there is something going on in your life that you need support with, your fellow congregants are there. I've never been to a Methodist church where I was not surrounded by people who were there for me when I needed it. At the time my father died, my parents lived in Social Circle, Georgia, which is a community of about 1,800 people, has a Methodist church there. And when my dad died, the church surrounded my mama with love and care, even though she didn't go. She hated potluck suppers and swore she was never going to another one again. But when my dad died, they were right there, bringing food, coming in and sitting with her, talking to her, getting her through that time of trial. Years later, when my mom died, there wasn't anybody else left in the family but me, and immediately the Methodist church that I was going to in LaGrange at that time surrounded me with love. They came and sat with me. They helped me get the funeral arrangements going. They brought food in case I was having people coming in. They were there for me. My mom died on the 14th of December, and one of the things that these church people did for me was that right around Christmas time, one of the husband and wives who went to the Sunday school that I attended were having a Christmas party. They called me up and said, "We want you to come to the Christmas party." I was not part of their social life at all, but they insisted that I come, and they made me feel so welcome, made me feel a part of that group and feel a little bit less alone at the time when my mom had just died. So another thing about the Methodist Church is we care for people. We may not know them very well. We may not have anything socially that connects us. But in a time of need, we are always there for each other. The church that I attended when I was in Juneau was a very small church. It only had about 100 people on the rolls, and there were 30 who more often than not came to church. So it was really a congregation of about 30 people. This small church managed to keep a food pantry going. Admittedly, it was only one big bookcase of shelves, but we fed several people in that community. Excuse me. When Abigail's grandparents on her dad's side, both of them, they died within 2 or 3 years of each other, the church was there. They had receptions after the funerals, after the memorial services. They went and called on her granddad after his wife died, even though he did not go to church, didn't believe in church very much. But they were there for him. We always laughed that there was a huge sign above the church that said, "All crazy people come here." Because on any given Sunday, we would have... we had one lady who was a severe alcoholic, and she would come and we welcomed her with open arms. Most of the time she would fall asleep in the pew, or she would yell out something in the middle of the church service. But we were always welcoming to whoever wanted to come to our church services. So what does it mean to be a Methodist? It means that continuity that we were talking about. It means the open arms of the church. We never see a stranger. We always welcome everybody. I am so, so proud that we are a church that welcomes everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, what your circumstances are. Our doors are open, and they've always been open. Now, I have to admit, I'm from a very segregated state, and it was segregated. And to this day, there are not that many congregations that are interracial. But we do our best. If somebody wants to come to our church, we're here for them. The joys of singing. Even though you guys up here in the Northwest sing different hymns than I did, every once in a while you sing one that I know, which is really nice. You know, and I keep thinking, okay, where are the songs I sang when I was a kid, you know, that kind of thing. The Sunday schools and Bible study. Oh my goodness, that's how I came to love and respect and to study the Bible, was through Sunday school and all the Bible studies that I've been to through my life. Didn't matter what church it was or where, but I always have attended Sunday school. And then finally, the potluck suppers. My goodness, we cannot be a Methodist church without potluck suppers. Even though my mom declared for sure we would never go to another potluck supper, I've always been pleased that we have them. We're good cooks, we have good fellowship, and we love each other. Thank you very much.
So, Laura, I have a question. When did you become a lay speaker?
When did I become? I became a lay speaker in Juneau. There was a gentleman in Alaska who taught the lay speaker classes, and because I taught the Sunday school class in the church I went to, they thought that I would, number one, be a good lay speaker, and number two, that I'd be a good lay leader to go to the church, to the annual conference. So that's how I got to be there.
And you're wanting to preach here?
This is a much bigger congregation.
Yes. But we're all still the same Methodist people.
Yes, you are. And I could preach the. Yes, it would be difficult, but I could do it. One of the things that I did as a part of my career in banking was that I taught classes. So I had to learn how to stand up and speak in front of people, and also teach them how to speak in front of people. So that's where I got it from.